What if I told you that having an estate plan isn't enough? Even the most beautifully drafted documents can fall apart simply because the people they were written for don't understand how they actually work. In this episode of The Legacy of Love, I sit down with estate planning attorney and educator 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐠, the founder of Organized Afterlife. Jen has a true gift for turning complex legal concepts into clear, practical guidance. And her mission? To help families not just create a plan, but truly understand it. We talk about the biggest gaps in estate planning today, how to avoid the common mistakes that can derail even the best intentions, and why education and empowerment are just as important as the legal documents themselves. Whether you've already created your estate plan, you're just beginning to think about one, or you're supporting a loved one through this process, this conversation will give you the clarity and confidence to take the next step with intention. I'm sure you know someone that hasn't started their estate plan yet and really needs to. This episode is a great place to begin. So I want to encourage you to share this with that person. Just press the pause button and share it with your loved one who will absolutely benefit. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. 𝐿𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐠, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, so as we start off this conversation, I would love to hear what brought you to this work and to founding, the Organized Afterlife.
Well, I came to being a lawyer maybe a little bit differently than a lot of people do. I think the stereotype is people watching lawyer shows and thinking, "Wow, I want to argue all day." And they go to law school. And I came to the law because I wanted to be a teacher.
Mm.
And as I started having experiences in the classroom, I realized I didn't have the energy for young kids. And I would get really frustrated with teenagers who weren't as interested in whatever I was interested in. I didn't have the patience for that. And so I ended up shadowing an estate planning attorney from my hometown. And I realized he was teaching as he was walking people through getting their estate plan set up. And I was like, okay, that's it. I want to spend my days teaching adults on something that's really important for them with people who really want to know the answers to things and are really invested.
Wow. I love that. And that makes so much sense of kind of why you approach this work. I love that teaching is kind of the foundation of what brought you to
Mhm.
estate planning because I
Absolutely.
absolutely agree. And I don't think every attorney and every estate planning attorney really sees that. But
Hmm.
that's where I really think that the education piece should be so much part of the job.
It really, really is. And you see
Yeah.
it, and I see it too now that I do more administrative work. Kind of after and seeing those plans play out, and sometimes not totally playing out. Is just that you can have a great plan in place, but if it's not implemented, then it won't play out how it's supposed to.
Yes. Yeah,
So
exactly.
knowing how to implement it is so key.
Well, is that kind of a piece of what inspired you to start the Organized Afterlife?
100%. Yeah. And kind of going back to that idea of, like it's not always explained very well, in the outset when you're meeting with an attorney, what's going on. And I come into it maybe like a kindergarten teacher, in the form of an estate planning attorney, but not everyone does. And, so you go in for your estate plan and you're working with a professional. I always recommend working with a professional because they're the only ones that can bring the strategy into it, right? That you need.
Right.
But when they're talking about it, it's a fire hose number one. Like even when I'm working with clients and explaining it, and I think I do it, kind of explain it a little bit better than most, but it's still just so much information at once, let alone just getting your bearings of like what a will does, when does probate happen, why would it make sense to do a trust? Okay, and then what do I do after I sign the documents? And just that general baseline of information even before you get into the details of like, well, what should my trustee say, and who would make a good trustee, and who should I pick, and is that the same as my executor, and all of the detailed stuff, that it's just, there's not enough time when you're sitting with an attorney to come up to speed. And that's what I was running into, is that number one, it's really hard to get up to speed, and that's so critical to how well your plan plays out. Because as I was getting into the administration, I was seeing that the people who understand it had plans that worked, and people that didn't understand it didn't get their plan implemented.
Yep.
And so it was kind of this like gulf I was seeing on both sides of it, right? Where, how do you get up to speed? But you have to get up to speed to get that plan to play out.
Yeah, I'm seeing that exactly in my practice. Well, and that's so much of what honestly inspired this podcast. I mean, when I work with clients in the planning phase, so that's when people don't need, for listeners, I know that you're following along, but when
Mhm.
people don't need, an immediate like successor trustee, they don't need immediate services, they're naming me in their estate planning documents.
Mhm.
And, first off, I want to acknowledge, these clients are steps ahead of most because they're actually getting a plan in place.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is, the 1/3 of people that are planning. And, I'm based in Silicon Valley. So I'm, for the most part, working with families that have a high net worth, are highly educated, and still they're coming and sitting down with me. They're only thinking after death. And they're
Mhm.
not really understanding their estate plan was also very much part of their life and incapacity. And
Mhm.
when I'm asking questions like that, I was like, I would have assumed that these are conversations that a client's having with their attorney, but clearly that's not always the case.
That's not always the case. And again, like there's only so much time. Like I feel a struggle like when I'm giving the information.
Yeah.
When people are like, okay, so I did a will, and so now like we've avoided probate. Like, no, 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 back up. That's not how it works. It does not do that. Just that basic like understanding of what these documents do, what else you have to do beyond the legal documents, so like in the administration, both of us run into, we don't even know what's going to play out until we know what assets are there and how they're owned and what beneficiary designations are there and all of that stuff, right? And that's something that no professional is going to necessarily do for you during your lifetime.
Yes. Yep. And
And
that's where,
yeah,
it breaks your heart when someone's set up the plan and, has a trust and the trust is not funded.
right.
And
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yep.
yeah. I just had a
Yep.
phone call like 2 months ago, and this young girl, she's in her 20s, an only child. Her dad just passed. He had a very aggressive form of cancer. He did, do his estate planning documents, and she was really kind of everything: power of attorney, healthcare
Hmm.
decision maker, also successor trustee. Also, I want to note that he basically only did he didn't work with an attorney. He did like kind of a
Yeah.
DIY estate
Right.
plan.
He's like Googling and like, okay, I think I know how this works. So this is what I'm going to try and do. Right.
Yeah, and the main asset was the house in San Francisco. So, probably a good amount of money, but not
Yeah.
liquid.
And the California process, which is not easy or inexpensive.
Yes. So, and unfortunately the house had not been transferred into the trust.
Yep.
So, yeah, really breaks your heart where it's like most likely this is going to go through probate, and it's a lot of time, and obviously she's grieving and alone and very young. So it was just,
Yeah.
it could have been different.
I mean, it's really overwhelming. Like, and what really got me like just really heat up about this is, so I've always been interested in estate planning, ever since I was in law school. But the very first probate I did as kind of a newish attorney was a family friend, and it's what I call stupid probate, where it just felt stupid we had to go through
Yeah,
probate.
that's funny.
Someone who had a will,
Yeah.
yeah, who had a will, and in my state, it's different states kind of can take two different tracks, but my state's a state where you can own real estate with your spouse, but you have to have like special wording on your deed to show that you become the owner just because you survived.
Oh,
And it's like a box. It's either a check box or some of the older ones. It's like the difference of two words on a deed.
Wow.
And most people assume, well, if I die, my spouse gets it, and they get it without going through probate, and absolutely not the case. And I can tell you how often, it's multiple times a year where I have to sit down with the spouse, and hopefully they have that will so we know it goes to them. Because if they don't have a will, even crazier is the state backup plan includes the kids on the house. And that's just a nightmare
Wow.
where we have to like navigate that. But I have to sit down with surviving spouses and be like, okay, even though you had a will, like, yay, I'm so glad you have a will because we know that you're going to end up with your house. But also, like, we have to take this will to the courthouse, go through all of that, do all the publication, all the same things we always have to do with the probate to get you appointed so that you can retitle the house in your name. And it feels so stupid, but that's how it works. It's so frustrating.
And it's really just the difference of like checking a box.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It's the difference of wording on a deed, and lack of a will or not like having a will affects who gets it, but it doesn't affect whether we have to go through probate. And like what really struck me about that when we had to go through it is like when I was in high school, I lost my dad to very aggressive cancer, it was a 6-week process.
Wow.
And so like I know that like this is not an easy time for people. This is the worst time for
Yeah.
people. And like congratulations, you also have a legal issue to deal with. It's awful without not just like having an estate plan, but having one that actually works the way you need it to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I want to pick your brain and, really hear
Yeah.
about the organized afterlife,
Hmm.
what that entails, and also when you kind of recommend people, because is it an online course?
Hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, which I love. Like I've had visions of building something myself, so it's great to know that people like you exist, courses
Yes.
like this do already exist. So I'm curious, and what I love is that also you're an estate planning attorney. So
Mhm.
are you recommending that people do this kind of before setting up their estate plan? Are you recommending it after? It could be either or.
Yeah, either or. So,
Okay.
I mean, really, it's like what I have found over the years, I've been doing this for now over 15 years. And what I found out is like the secret sauce to having an effective estate plan, is yeah, yes, working through a professional to strategize, get a good plan that works for you and your family in place. But then you got to understand how it works and what you need to do to implement it. And when you have those two things together, it's like it's just magic. And the incredible thing, because like you talk about how you work a lot with kind of like what I would call like savvy people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Silicon Valley, tech savvy, educated. And the crazy thing that I've found is that the people who get this right aren't the ones who are necessarily like technologically or financially savvy. I've had financial professionals who have got it wrong, that we are stuck in a mess and they
Oh
didn't
yeah.
understand how to implement their plan. The people you think should get it don't necessarily. The people who usually end up understanding it are the widows. The widows,
Mm,
they leave an incredibly good estate plan, and their kids, they make it easy for their kids because
yeah.
they understood exactly what they needed to do because they had to clean up their husband's plan. And so, like, when I'm sitting down with a widow who's like, all right, Jen, understand what documents we're doing, why we're doing it, and what do I put on my beneficiary designations? What does my real
Yeah.
estate say? Like they're asking those. It's like, okay, you get it,
Yeah. You get why this matters.
right?
That makes so much sense. And yeah, I agree. Or also people that have sat in the role of like administering their parents' estate. I have a lot of clients like that where you can tell that they get it and they get why these documents matter so much.
Right. Yeah. And like what frustrated me was, okay, so you have to kind of walk through fire to learn enough of how it works to do this right. And I was like, well, what if people could find this out without having to walk through the fire?
Yeah.
And that's where the idea of, let's do an online course that's at your pace, because that's part of the problem is, you know,
We're busy.
it's a lot of, well, it's a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're like, okay, well, I'm going to learn this from my attorney in my first initial consult, no, that's a fire hose. Like you will be overwhelmed. And so let's move it to a system where you can just kind of take it at your own pace. Wow, my mind was just blown. I need to take a break, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And just take it step by step and then be empowered with that information. And I've had people take this course before they reached out to an attorney. I've had people take the class after they've had an estate plan. I've had clients take the course after they've had my estate plan, after we've worked together, and they're like, oh my gosh, Jen, that's what you were talking about. I just couldn't absorb it.
Oh, that makes
So
sense.
any
Yeah.
point, and so my signature course is really walking you through the steps of, what is this stuff? What's a will do versus a trust? Why would it make sense to have both? You know, what do these different things do? How does this work? And then so what do I do next? Well, you need to know what you have. Okay, what do I do then? Well, reach out to a professional. Here are tips in order to spot a professional that's going to bring value and bring that strategy that you need versus someone who's just going to slap a bunch of documents on you. So all that stuff.
I love that. Are you also kind of going through of like how to pick your proxies?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Because I think that that's another thing that I see in my practice. Maybe it's, the clients that, they've either had a recent health scare or they're just getting older and more frail. And the people that they named, in my opinion, probably were never really appropriate to be in
Mm-hmm.
those documents anyways, because it's like, oh, they live like, we're in the West Coast, they're in the East Coast, or, they're older
Yeah.
than them, like all of those kind of like practical pieces where it's like, if
Mm-hmm.
you're really having a health crisis, do you think that your older brother in the East Coast is really going to be the best person to be advocating
Right.
for your healthcare wishes? I mean, sometimes that is the case, but
Yeah.
I think more times than not, it's not really appropriate. And anyways, so I work with those clients too, where they're realizing, either as they're getting older, if they're having a health crisis, that, oh, my plan is kind of set up to fail, and now I need to kind of work
Yeah.
with a professional or
Right.
someone boots on the ground that can really have the capacity to support me.
Yeah.
So
We're just like understanding what these different roles are, right? That
yeah.
baseline of information to understand the difference between the person I put in my healthcare directive has a different role than my financial power of attorney. And that's similar to, but slightly different than the person who's going to deal with my assets. And, you know, are the people that I'm picking, you know, they don't have to be the same person. Like sometimes people like
Yeah.
aren't aware of that. They can be different people.
And I think sometimes that's a really good thing. I mean, that's honestly
Yeah, it can
my
be.
personal estate plan. That's how
Yeah,
it's
I
set
agree with
up.
that.
Who's
Yep.
managing the money versus, who is, named as guardian for our daughter. That's going to be
Yep.
different people. And there's good reason for that. I've seen on the administrative side where, people are buying houses for the quote unquote kids, and
Yeah.
the estate can be drained quickly. So I'm sure that you get asked this a lot, but I would love for listeners to know, especially because you're an estate planning attorney. Obviously, this course is not, you're not going to be set up with an estate plan at the end of it.
Hmm.
But how, other than that piece, is there any other kind of distinguishing factors of why would, what is the benefit of doing this course and doing the
Yeah.
estate plan?
Yeah, like why would you go with an attorney and learn how to do this?
Yeah.
One time someone asked me just a great question of like, well, if you tell me that I should work with a professional, why should I understand that? Isn't that what I'm paying the attorney for? And it's like
Yeah.
you're paying them for the strategy, so you can sit down and say those particular details of my brother lives on the East Coast. He's 20 years older than me. Should I name him as my healthcare agent? Should I name him as my financial power of attorney? And that attorney can sit there and say, okay, well, that's what these powers mean here in where we're sitting.
Hmm.
Here where I'm at in Minnesota is different than you and what those mean in California. And so having that knowledge base to be able to be like, okay, let's really figure out for your situation what the best thing is and all of those details. That's where that professional comes in. But walking in and not understanding that a healthcare agent and a financial power of attorney are two different things, trying to get up to speed means you're crowding out all of that detailed conversation you can have with that professional. And number one, locating the professional. There's so much like consumer issues, I think, in the estate planning space
Yeah.
where people are, they go online and they're sold DIY documents, and I get to see those play out, and they don't play out very.
They don't. They
Sometimes
don't.
sometimes they bring more problems to the table than they ever solved
I
for some
know.
some
I
people.
no, I've seen estate plans like that. I agree, where you're like, oh, if this estate just went through probate, things would have
I
been
would have rather.
actually, yeah, a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
simpler.
So you get like that end of the spectrum, all the way to attorneys who create, they look at wills and these legal documents as purely legal documents. They don't understand, that there is a plan that they should be providing. And I had a colleague call that a 5 grand binder, where where the attorney was bringing some knowledge to the table of what the document should say and what needs to be done to make them effective, but they weren't talking about, okay, we need your real estate deed to say that. We need what should your beneficiary designation say? And
Yeah.
so like you look at this like these very nice legal documents, and looking at it later and saying, is this going to play out? We don't know.
Yeah.
And so you get that spectrum. And so where you can connect the dots to say, okay, number one, individual, let's get you enough information so you can understand what a professional should be bringing to you, how to vet those professionals, number one.
Oh, I
And
love
number
that.
two,
Yeah.
having that knowledge base to be able to be a really effective partner with them to come up with that good strategy. And then after the fact, after you sign all these documents, okay, well, if I like here, cabins are a really big deal. So if I get that cabin up north someday, what do I need to do? What do I need to be thinking about so that my cabin doesn't do something it's not supposed to do when I'm gone? Trigger
Mm,
probate, go to the wrong person, whatever.
hmm. I love that. That makes so much sense. And I guess this is the piece where I love, obviously I love professionals like us where we're proactive and trying to
Yes.
empower individuals. I think, this is where for me personally where I've been just really racking my brain of like how can we continue to break this down and make it so digestible and understandable for people, because
Yeah.
I think that that's so much of why, 1 in 3 people in this country actually have an estate plan. There's a lack of, information. I think there's
Hmm.
also an intimidation factor. A lot of
Absolutely.
people are intimidated
Yeah.
by attorneys, kind of the image that you painted of like, a litigator in court. That's what people kind
Yeah.
of think. And, I love my estate planning attorneys, you're kind of made from a for the most
Different.
part,
We're
made from
cut
a
a little
different
bit
cloth.
different.
And and then I think also the cost can be kind of a big kind of factor, and I think an intimidation of people not really understanding what this costs. Anyways, I love the course because I'm like, that just makes so much sense. You're empowering people, and then they're able to kind of go in and know enough, right,
Mhm.
of what to be thinking as they're partnering with a professional. And you really are speaking to, it could be anyone in any state. It's because you're
Right.
not
Yeah.
getting granular, you're not giving legal advice, you're just
Right.
giving,
Yeah.
this is what is an estate plan, these are things to know, from hiring an
Yeah.
attorney to choosing your proxies.
Exactly. Yep. The steps to take, all of that stuff.
I'm also thinking that maybe a part of the course is things to do after you've set up the estate
Yeah,
plan. So
absolutely.
like
That's
funding the trust and all of,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I call it implementation because like, in our both of us, the professional jargon is trust funding. That's what it's always
Yeah.
been called, right? And the thing, that I realized pretty quickly is, well, people who don't have trust need to make sure their assets are doing the right thing. The deeds say the right thing, beneficiary designations say the right thing. And so kind of those ideas of like trust funding are ideas that anyone should do regardless of the kind of plan they have in place.
Yeah.
the more I do this, the more I love trust.
Dude, I'm curious. I know this is going to get too state specific, but
Right. Yeah.
can you I know California and kind of that when it makes sense, which honestly for most people in California, especially if you own a home, it makes sense
Yeah. Yeah.
to set up a trust. But in Minnesota, is there kind of a general kind of trigger?
I would say like traditionally, so again, like over 15 years. So and I think COVID was the big, at least for me, it was like the big, like kind of an aha moment of traditionally Minnesota's probate is in the category of states where like probate, quote unquote, isn't that bad.
Okay, great. That was one of my questions too for
Yes.
you. Yeah,
Right.
California for listeners, it's
Is
horrible.
bad. Right. So I mean, California is one of the examples I use. So there are states that have really burdensome things. I'm only licensed in Minnesota, so I can only really speak to Minnesota. So this is what I understand in these other states. But Florida requires a resident executor. A lot of snowbirds don't have that. Iowa allows attorneys to take a percentage of the estate as the fee for the probate. And so if they're not doing a whole heck of a lot of work, but the asset's value is huge, we see that with a lot of farms, the attorney's fee is huge.
That's how it is in California too. Yeah.
And like your court system, I think they can take the court fee is also a percentage of the estate. So the fees are astronomical.
Like if the fees are a lot, it's typically like the, executor or administrator takes a percentage and then
Mm-hmm.
the attorney and
Mm-hmm.
it's significant.
Yeah.
And it's also, it's very expensive, but it's also so time consuming.
It's so time
I
consuming.
rarely do probates,
Yeah.
and I did one because I was working with the client when she was alive. And Jen, it was very simple. She had an investment account, a checking account. I kid you not, that is it. It's going to a
Mm-hmm.
charity. She only had a will, so
Oh
that's
man.
where it had to
Yep.
go through probate.
Yep.
And because the courts are so delayed, it took 2 years to administer this
And
estate.
that's the problem.
Two
So
years.
yeah, so in Minnesota, actually, here's another problem that I'm also seeing coming up is all probates everywhere as far as I've ever run into. They're all public,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And for most people that shouldn't be a big deal. Historically, who's really that interested in
Yeah.
you're
Who
probably
cares?
not that important that people are walking to the courthouse to see what's going on, right? But now it's a different world, right?
Yeah.
So Minnesota, their court filing fee is $350 across the board. That's what Prince's estate had to pay the court. Okay.
Oh,
So that
okay.
was the court fee. You had a publication fee, but then attorneys can only, we have to back up our bills. We have to show why our bills were what they were, and they have to be related to the work involved and kind of the value brought to the table. But we don't, it's called statutory fees. We don't get
Yeah.
statutory fees. We can't just say like, oh, it was worth that much. We're going to take that percentage. How much did we really do? So for most people, especially when we have stupid probate where we don't have like legal complication, it's just the bureaucracy of it.
Yeah. It's not a lot of time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So usually we see fees for that, like probably around $10,000, unless we have to do estate taxes, which comes really quick for us in Minnesota. We like it affects a lot
Hmm.
more people in Minnesota than in other places. So like that's what we look at. And so historically, attorneys would be like, well, how much does it cost to set up a trust? And maybe you still have probate and really like
Hmm.
what should we really do? Well, what I saw during COVID is number one, you never can know. We have a well-funded judicial system,
Hmm.
but you never can tell, when the court is
Because
going
of
to be
just the
stressed.
numbers. I mean, that's where things
Yeah.
just really,
Yeah.
change. I mean, that's exactly where, this client that I administered her estate, I guess she passed in the very end of 2022, but the courts have
Yeah.
just changed so much.
Yeah. They're just overwhelmed and when they need, it takes a while for them to get if they get, and
Yeah.
so if they can't get to everybody because they don't have the resources, guess what falls at the end of the, like falls to the bottom? Dead
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
Dead people can wait. And that's what we saw during COVID. And for us, it's not so much a cost issue. It's the delay, assets are frozen, it's public. Something I'm seeing is that our court system doesn't allow video cameras in the courtroom, but there are states that do. And so I'm starting to see on YouTube, like people will go through court video for normal people. And if people are having a fight about your estate, that's interesting. That's
Oh,
something to talk about. And so it's on a YouTube video for someone with a following. Like that's terrifying.
oh,
And our records are public. We don't have the video, but we have a very easy to access online system for records,
yeah.
and so people can find out stuff very easily with a couple clicks of a button. I can find, like, in 30 seconds, I know what Prince owned because everything went through probate, and I have access, like that's something that anyone can access.
Wow. Did he not have, I don't know the details of his
Oh my
estate.
God. I could talk a whole hour on that. No, so yeah, Prince was super interesting because like very lawyered up individual, did a lot of things, like he was legally savvy. He
Wow.
got like he worked with really smart lawyers, had these like epic battles with record companies and doing things to maneuver out of bad deals, and just very savvy. He was also very savvy when it came to acquiring property. So he owned a bunch of real estate just outside of Minneapolis,
Okay.
and no one knew about it because he would set up LLCs that had nothing to do with
I
anyone. Could
see.
like No one could look at the tax records and be like, "Oh, Prince owns that."
Yeah.
No one knew.
A lot of people do
And
that in Silicon Valley.
yes,
Yeah.
and so he was like he was incredibly savvy. He worked with really smart lawyers. He died and had no estate plan, none, zero,
None.
nothing, nothing.
Wow.
And so the best thing I can figure, because it seems like there's like two problems when people don't get an estate plan. They're intimidated by lawyers, or they don't want to admit that they're going to die.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
I don't think he wanted to address.
That reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be a big part, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So everything went through probate. It
Wow.
all went according to Minnesota intestacy law, which means, the law that the state will use when you don't tell them what to do through your will.
Wow.
And so everything's public. For us, when you don't have a will, step siblings get the same as regular siblings. And that was a dynamic in his
Of in
situation.
his
And
family.
so did he want that to happen? We don't know. He didn't tell us, so
Wow.
it's incredible. And
That's pretty shocking.
yeah.
Do you know roughly the size of his estate?
Oh man, I'd have to look back at it. But I can find out, right? Like with like two strokes of key stuff, I can find
Wow.
out. I know it was like a federally taxable estate, so it was north of 10 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's too bad. It's really sad when you see situations like that. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, with a few of, my clients in the planning phase, I do have a few attorneys and, they're not estate planning attorneys, but they're
Mhm.
attorneys. And I've found actually with each one, when I was asking them kind of questions, like just
Mhm.
for example, like, tell me about your power of attorney and your advanced healthcare directive. And all of them weren't thinking about that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it really shocked me where I was like,
Isn't that
really?
amazing?
You're an attorney and you don't know
Like,
this?
you
And
know
I,
what this document is? You haven't thought about it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, I think kind of going back what we were talking about before with, quote unquote savvy people, like just because you're savvy,
Hmm.
well educated, maybe even an attorney yourself, like let's
Hmm.
not assume that we kind of know everything and have the most well thought out plan.
Yeah. And that goes back to like that, the secret sauce of like understanding the basics, knowing what you need to do to implement it, and then working with that professional who can strategize. Right. So many people, when I say, well, to have a plan, if you want to avoid probate, you have to have more than a will. And people are like, it was so overwhelming to even think about getting a will. You're telling me there's more? Yeah, there is.
Yeah, there's
There is.
more.
But like it's the little ladies who get it right. Like it's not hard. It's
Yeah.
not, what you need to know as a consumer, as someone who's trying to get this lined up. for yourself and for your family, you don't have to feel like you have to be super savvy. And it's not really hard information or confusing information. It's just there's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
bit to it. But once you get the basics, it's there's a logic to it, and it can be straightforward once you get how it all plays together. And let the attorney worry about all the detail of it.
Yeah.
You might run into this too, where like you run into an individual who you can tell has Googled,
Oh.
and they are so confused. Like they come in, and so like we start worrying about estate taxes when a net worth is near $3 million, because that's our state estate tax exemption.
Oh,
So it hits
okay.
people a lot sooner here than a lot than
Yeah,
I think
that's a lot
somewhere else.
sooner.
Yeah, but I can't tell you how many people I have walk in the door who are like, all right, Jen, so like how do we get the marital deduction, and do I need a credit shelter? And they have $1 million worth of net worth, and they're retirement age. So like the likelihood they're going to have a tax problem is
Very
not
low.
great,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? We need to talk about how are we going to avoid probate,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
let's focus
I
on
think
something else.
people to put too much on themselves and get overwhelmed and just stop. And it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's that fine line. I don't. It reminds me a bit of like, like going to the doctor, right? Like
Yeah,
we obviously we want to be, especially nowadays with our healthcare system.
yeah.
If you're just going in for to the doctor and you're not advocating for your health, you're probably not going to get the
Hmm.
best care. But you
Hmm.
also don't want to go in and you act like you know everything because you've been on
Right. Yeah.
WebMD. So
Yeah.
it is kind of like this relationship and this partnership. And I think
Hmm.
our legal documents are really similar in that,
Hmm.
where we can be
Absolutely.
empowered. We can think about some of these things before the meeting, hopefully. So again, this is where I'm like, I love what you're doing. Is just with the name. So the organized afterlife is a piece of it. Also, just organizing like like just even your files. Is that a piece?
Part of the steps, right, is understanding what you own.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have everything together when you meet with an attorney. But at some point in the process, like if you don't understand what real estate you own,
Mm.
again, because we love our cabins and because we have a lot of farmland, sometimes we run into problems with it. I mean, it seems silly. And like as attorneys, we're like, how do they not know what they own? But it happens where like you inherit,
Yeah.
your dad's farm with your three siblings, or you inherit the family cabin with your three siblings. And
Or a
that ends up
timeshare.
triggering, yeah, or
Timeshares.
timeshare. Yeah.
Oh.
And that's the thing that
Yeah.
that triggers the probate, and you never mentioned it, like just
Yeah.
getting like gathering information about what you have, so that at some point in the process, those things get lined up to follow the plan, that funding thing. I call it financial organization, but that idea that not only do I have to have like the strategy, those legal documents set up the strategy of the plan, but I got to get my
Mhm.
assets to follow the plan. And that's where like this organization, it's just like a pantry, you get your system in place. But if you bring in your groceries and dump them on the floor, your pantry is a mess, so it's
Yeah.
it's that dynamic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I love that where you started was with education, because that just, I don't know, I think that's a bit of your secret sauce. I think that can be the hard part of, just, being a professional and, whether you're an attorney or fiduciary or something else, we
Yeah.
speak this language all day, every
Yeah.
day, and myself included. I mean, that's been so much of even kind of having the podcast and speaking to a broader audience and making sure this isn't going over people's head, that this is
Yeah.
really digestible. And it's not a, you'd think, oh, this is an easy skill set, but it's not. And I think that
Great.
that's
Yeah.
really where, of course, us talking to professionals, like I just came back from a conference which is like always so fun, at
Uh-huh.
least if you
Yep.
love the work that you do,
Yes.
I always
Yeah.
take away so much. But all of the stuff is just like so granular and, a
Yeah.
non-professional most likely is not going to A, be interested, and B, it's going to go over their head. And it's
Hmm.
great for us to know that. But when we're, speaking with our clients, we need to kind of
Yeah.
modify that. One of the people that I've spoken with, I don't know if you're familiar with Barbara Carnes and her work, but she's written the Hospice Blue Book.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
When she was telling her story, she was like, I wanted to write this booklet so that, when people are right, like with a loved one on their deathbed,
Yeah.
they're not going to be able to be processing complicated information. I wanted to write
Hmm.
this for so that a 5-year-old could understand.
Hmm.
So that's where your story kind of reminded me of that, where I'm
Hmm.
like, yes, this is exactly what we need. So, anyways, I applaud you and the work that you're
Thanks
doing.
so much.
Yeah, as we wrap up our conversation, are there anything that we haven't touched upon or any pieces that you would love to just leave listeners with?
Wow. I mean, we've covered a ton, but people can find resources at organizedafterlife.com. And a question I get a lot is, this is very state specific, right? California is so different than Minnesota. So is this a Minnesota specific thing? No, not at all. Like the baseline information you need, what I found, that part's not state specific. That part's the same anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
So I have students from all across the country. And yeah, it's just so cool to see them so empowered at the end and being like, now I get it. Now I know why my attorney is saying that. Now I know what I have to do. This is, like I went ahead and now I have my estate plan and I know how it works, like it's cool.
I love that. I love the work you're doing. We'll include all the links of where to find you and also where to check out the Organized Afterlife in the show notes so listeners can find you. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This
Yes,
has been so much
absolutely.
fun. I'm absolutely inspired and I love your ability to teach and break down these complex
Yeah.
topics into digestible form for people because that's really what we need. So thank you, Jen.
Thanks so much.